Well, I'm going to tell a little story today about a footballer who became quite famous in his time. Now, we're going back, so it'll be your older listeners who will understand the story. But the player in question only passed away within the last few years, much lauded in his later life. I'm talking about the famous German goalkeeper who played all his career in the English leagues, Bert Trautmann. Now, Bert Trautmann was a German prisoner of war who had been a centre half, but in the prisoner of war camp in the late 1940s, somebody got injured and Bert went in goals and found he had an aptitude for it. So much so that quite quickly, some of the bigger clubs started looking at him. He started playing for St Helens Town in Lancashire. And before long, the scouts were going around looking at this guy because he was very athletic. He was about 6'2" tall, and he had great handling of the ball. And eventually, Manchester City, who were a biggish club then and are a big club now, decided to risk it in signing. Now, this wasn't necessarily very popular just after the Second World War because he'd been in the Wehrmacht, and also in Manchester itself there was a big Jewish population who'd suffered terribly in the war years, and the idea of signing a former German paratrooper didn't really go down too well. So he came into a wave of opprobrium. He won over most of his teammates pretty quickly by simply the brilliance of his performance. And right through the 1950s, he enjoyed, a little bit of success and notoriety probably in equal proportion, although he was regarded as a very decent man off the field. And even so much so that the chief rabbi in Manchester spoke on his behalf against the people who were giving him a bad time at matches when he got a lot of comments, a lot of heckling, a lot of people, shouting abuse at him. But of course, things changed in the mid-1950s. Manchester City had quite a good side in those days. They had up front, Don Revie was playing for them, and he'd been Footballer of the Year. Bert Trautmann himself became Footballer of the Year in the English leagues. They had other good players like the rugged Welsh halfback Roy Paul, and the only problem was that Bert made tremendous saves, ridiculously good saves, and everyone in the game knew it. But one of the things that people don't realise was the most stupendous saves that Bert Trautmann made were actually from a triumvirate of Scottish central defenders in his own team. These were Big Dave Ewing, a big raw-boned guy from Perthshire, who eventually briefly managed Hibs, had a long career in the English game. And then there was John McTavish, who came from Ayrshire and went to St Mirren later and had, again, a long career. And there was Jackie Plenderleith, who came from Hibs and had a fairly decent career himself and was capped for Scotland. Now, Big Dave Ewing was lethal in his own penalty area. He was so lethal that when at Main Road, the old ground that Manchester City had, big old ground, when there was an opposition set piece around the box, the home forwards were deputed not to bother about the opposition, but to go back and mark their own central defenders. So Billy McAdams, who was a centre forward, an Irish international, quite often had to go back and mark Dave Ewing because Dave Ewing made ridiculous interceptions of the ball. Now, I know that in his time at Main Road, Dave Ewing scored a massive number of own goals. John McTavish scored 3 own goals in 3 consecutive home games. So you can see that Now, the most stupendous saves, and when Bert passed away a few years ago, this wasn't remarked on in all the obituaries. The most stupendous saves he made were definitely from his own central defenders. Bert, of course, had a long career. Now, in the 1950s, Harry Gregg, who was goalkeeper of the tournament at the 1958 World Cup, when asked about goalkeepers, said the best he ever saw was Bert Trautmann. Sadly, Bert never got capped for the German national side, probably because he was not in the Bundesliga. He was playing in the English First Division, but he had plenty of admirers. Having started his career, he had a long career from the late 1940s through the mid-1960s. Now, when he finally decided to retire from the game, there was 47,000 at his testimonial match. I was privileged enough to be one of them. Also, there was, from across the other side of Manchester, there was an attempt to actually bring him out of retirement to play for Manchester United. Bobby Charlton, when asked about goalkeepers, in his usual very understated way, said, "I always found Bert Trautmann, the Manchester City goalkeeper, a very difficult opponent." And most people did, but Bert's biggest opponents were his own triumvirate of Scottish central defenders. Thank you. Yeah, just as an extra anecdote, one of the things I forgot to mention, of course, which a lot of people were aware of, because it was in all the newsreels in the 1950s, before the days when a lot of people had televisions, but people went to the cinema and saw newsreels. And this was, of course, Bert Trautmann breaking his neck in the 1956 Cup final, when Manchester City, having been in the final the year before and lost, were in the final against Birmingham City, and Birmingham's forward, Peter Murphy, collided with him when Bert came out to collect the ball, and his knee hit Bert's neck and broke his neck. Bert was in quite a lot of agony, but he carried on playing the game. I didn't realise how damaged he was. But later on, when he went back to the dressing room, he asked one of the other players at his own side to give his neck a rub because he said it was hurting. And Roy Little, the fullback, had just dropped his cup winner's medal, and it'd gone through the slats of a slatted seat. And he says, "I'll be with you in a second, Bert, but my medal's gone." And he didn't rub Bert's neck. The doctors said it's just as well he didn't, because if he had done, then it might well have been curtains for Bert. I think the result of this unfortunate incident cemented Bert's reputation, because he came back, and of course he played for at least a decade after that, and had a very long career. And as I say, he was Footballer of the Year in the English divisions, as was his one-time teammate Don Revie, who went on to manage Leeds to great success. So some of your older viewers of these little broadcasts and podcasts will know all about this.